Welcome back to the garage. It's been a long time since I've made a video, mostly because my hard drive and my solid state backup drive and my GoPro all decided to not get along, and I lost a ton of different videos and footage that I'd taken. However, got up the motivation to get back out here today, help you guys out if you're trying to make some decisions. It's gotten really hot here in Minnesota recently, and that has led to me making a video about the dual electric fan setup I have on the Mustang. Now, the 427 is definitely part volcano, produces a ton of heat. However, what I've been using is a Ford Contour, Mercury Mystique, Mercury Cougar dual electric fan setup. And why I chose the dual Contour style fan for the Mustang, let me run it down for you. When you're doing an electric fan conversion, there are a lot of variables and things that are unknown. The 427 puts out an enormous amount of heat. It is a heat producing engine. And so I need a powerful fan that does a really good job cooling. Now, I could have gone, I think, 3 different ways really. From the OEM manufacturer standpoint or aftermarket replacement, you have the Lincoln Mark 8 fan, the Ford Contour fan setup, or a full aftermarket manufacturer. Now, the Lincoln Mark 8 is pretty much right out. It takes 4.5 inches of space, and I did not have it. I certainly do not have that now with the serpentine conversion. Now, looking inside the engine bay, you can see with the fan out, it might look like there's some space up here between the radiator and the pulley, but there's not much. I have just over 4 inches. Now I have a little bit less than 4 inches at the bottom. It looks like we are right at about 3.5 inches from the nose, maybe even a little bit less, 3 3/4, sorry, to the box here. So I needed something a little bit narrower. That brings it down to the dual Contour fan, which is a dual 12-inch setup, or something aftermarket. The problem that I found with aftermarket is I don't trust them. Number one, when it comes to an OEM style fan, you know that it was built to last, because if it fails, that's a warranty claim, and people are going to bring their new cars back to the dealer and say, hey, fix this. When you're in a full aftermarket racing environment, where people are putting electric fans in place of the factory stuff, the line gets a little bit more blurry. And also, I simply don't trust the ratings on them. Now, looking online, I found a fan that was a dual 13.5-inch fan, drawing 28 amps, and it was rated at 4,600 cubic feet per minute. I don't know. I don't see how that's accurate. I don't see how it's actually going to happen. And that brings us to a major problem when it comes to electrical components. The manufacturers lie a lot. 500 pounds of breakaway torque on an impact gun, 1,000-watt amplifier, 5 horsepower blender. But when the few people out there with the equipment and the time really put those things to the test, they fail. They don't produce what they said they were going to. And that matters to me. I need a fan that works really well. It's powerful, that keeps engines cool. And with the Contour fan, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence going all the way back into the 90s that it was an awesome fan. It really, really worked well. So that's the reason why I went with the dual Contour fan setup. I knew it was going to fit that radiator just about perfectly, and it did. I knew that it was really high performance, that it was going to flow a lot of air and hopefully keep a hot running racing style engine cool. It has. This fan by, I think it's TYC, the 620-750, even right now online, it's about $150. That's as cheap as aftermarket fans get, even single fans. So it seemed like a really great deal. So when it comes to installation on this aftermarket Champion radiator, you can see we've got these kind of universal slots in this particular kind of a fin that sticks out to the side. I drilled extra hole, and what I'm using to connect the fan is just this. I bought these nylon spacers, cut them down to size. The bolt goes through a hole that I drilled in the housing for the fan. It doesn't dig into the fans, but it holds it nice and close. So this was a really simple solution. I just have 4 of these. It holds the fan up there. It looks great, it's non-intrusive, and it's pretty easy to work with. And here you can see the nylon bushing in between the fan and the radiator, making a space so the radiator doesn't eat into, or so the fan doesn't eat into the radiator itself. So here we are out in the garage, and today we are going to be testing dual fans. So I picked up a junkyard Mercury Cougar dual fan setup because there are myths and legends about how incredible the Ford OEM fans are and how much better they are than the aftermarket fans. This is especially the case with the legend of the Lincoln Mark 8 fan, but it also persists with the dual fans for like the Ford Contour. Now, let's go ahead and test these fans out. Both from a flow perspective, I have an amp meter to see how much power they're drawing. We can figure out which of these fans are better. Are you really better off going to a junkyard and finding an OEM fan, if low mileage, if you can find it, or are you just as well off or even better off getting a cheap aftermarket unit? So let's take a look at our setup here. This is an extremely advanced painter's tape holding the fan onto this box. And it's important that we have our air meter readings, our anemometer readings, from inside the box. And I'll be showing these to you. And the reason why it's so important to have it inside the box rather than on the other side is because air doesn't flow equally. So if I use the anemometer over here, it's going to flow differently here, it's going to flow differently there, it's going to flow differently here. On this side of the box, we can see what the rectangular size is, calculate the overall square footage, and use that along with the velocity traveling through the anemometer to figure out just how many cubic feet per minute we are actually flowing. It's not exact science, it's not the very best setup, but it's a heck of a lot better than trying to gauge how many feet per minute you're flowing by holding this just in front of the fans. Okay, so here we have the old fan, this aftermarket fan. It's by TYC. It's a 620-750. And this is the OEM factory replacement style fan. We'll find out whether or not this is as good as the factory original fan that came out of a Mercury Cougar. You know, the rumors say that the factory Ford OEM fans are just way better than these aftermarket ones. We have this set up. Right now we've got the battery charger on the battery to help offset some of the drain. Running about 13 volts or so. That's going to drop real quick once we power it up. And in here is about 175 degrees. In here is about 190. Here's our probe. I'm going to drop this in and see what happens. Okay, the fan's just kicked on. And you can see we're running at about 14.5 or so amps. The voltage is pulling down pretty quickly. Around back, let's find out what kind of flow we're getting. Looks like about 8.0, 8.5, 9, 8.5, 8.5, 8.0. And remember, you have to stop this thing every time you move it to get everything to equalize out. So yeah, on low speed, we're running about 8, I would say, on average, 4 miles per hour. Now let's go ahead, come over here, and you can see we are still pulling about 14.5 amps. Let's drop the probe into our hot water. This should kick on the high speed. Give it just a second here. There we go. And you can see it jumped up there to about 24 amps and is now back down to about 21. 21 amp draw. Let's find out what kind of speed we're getting. 10 and a half, 11. 11. About 11. And again, you have to stop the anemometer for a minute and let everything kind of equalize. We're getting stuff blown off the shelf back there. A little bit lower. I think our average is probably, we're probably averaging around 10, depending on where we're at. So under high speed, the draw on this one is about 21 amps. All right, and now we have the Ford OEM factory fan set up. You can see right here, we've got the factory number on it. I'm using the same fan controller. Okay, let's see what happens, whether or not we can get low speed to kick on. The water's cooled down a little bit, but I think we should be able to do it. We'll take a look, see what kind of draw we get as it first fires up on low speed. There we go. We saw a maximum of 21 amps, and it's settling in at about 13 and a half amps draw. Let's see, airspeed. There's 8. 7, 8. Give it a second. I would say average airspeed is probably about 7 miles per hour. Let's come over here. We'll drop her into the hotter water. And we'll watch this. There you go, 22 amps for a second. High speed kicks in, 21. It really didn't increase it more. And we're running right about 18 amps of draw. Double check that. Yeah, only 18 amps on the Ford factory unit. And the velocity we're running about 9. 10 and a half over here. About 9 and a half down there. I would say we're averaging about maybe 9 and a half. Yeah, I would say that's fair. We're averaging probably about 9 and a half miles per hour with the Mercury Cougar OEM stuff. There is one more test that I really want to do, and that is to show what happens when you increase the voltage, like when a car is running. So I've got it at about 13.75 volts here. I've got the Focus in the garage. I've got the jumpers hooked up to the Focus's battery while it's running. This should enable me to have better battery flow to it. We're going to go ahead and engage this on hot.
Okay, so it just kicked on high. You can see we're running about 27 amps that it's pulling right now at 12.5 volts, almost 13 volts. Now let's take a look and see what kind of velocity we're getting. Pulling about 12 miles per hour there max. 12 over here. 12 and a half. Almost 13. So I think our average is probably around 12 miles per hour with it hooked up to the Focus.
And here we are, everything is installed and back together. You can notice, if you thought that I was exaggerating about the kind of space that we have, you can see right here, I don't have really any clearance. As you can see, all back together, I don't really have any clearance. I got about, a quarter of an inch before that quick disconnect runs into the power steering pulley. Over here you can see we do have, you know, a little bit of clearance, but not a lot. I really don't have, with this FE in here, I really do not have a lot of space to play with. Okay, so what do we learn from this particular experiment, this test? Quite frankly, the TYC aftermarket fan blew the doors off of the Ford factory OEM fan, which was supposed to have like 60,000 miles on it. And if we looked at the aftermarket fan, it pulled about 21 amps consistently on high speed and about 15 amps on low speed. The Ford factory fan pulled about 18 amps on high speed and about 13 amps on low speed. So the bottom line is the aftermarket fan outperformed the Ford factory fan, and by a significant margin. The power drain is no big deal. I thought that the contour fans or the OEM replacement styles for that would draw a lot more than a consistent, 21 to 28 amps. That's not that bad for both motors, and well within the capabilities of the fan controller that I purchased. So welcome to the kitchen. Why are we in the kitchen instead of the garage? Who's there? Oh, it's Old Man Winter. Welcome to Minnesota. It's cold outside. And so I'm gonna do this in here in the kitchen. I wanted to cover a couple of things that I may not have covered in the video. First of all, I've got the Cougar fan here, and I did some modifications to the fan housing in order to install it into the Mustang. They were minor, but I cut the top bracket off, and that's because the top bracket was actually pushing against the radiator and pushing the fan assembly away from the radiator core. Super important for me for clearance, and also super important for efficiency. If you have gaps between your fan and your radiator core, when the fans are running, they'll create low pressure in front of them, and that's how it forces air through the radiator so efficiently. Well, if there's a gap, the air will come out of the fan, wrap around, and go right back through the fan without traveling through the radiator again at all. Also, on the sides, I had to cut all of these mounting tabs down. The original had like kind of a hook assembly to mount into the car, the Contour or Cougar. They stick out to the side too far. I had to cut them off to clear things that were on the side of the radiator in the Mustang, like the battery. In addition, you can probably see here, I cut kind of a V shape in here and drilled 1/2-inch holes, and that was so that I could run the wiring harness and just kind of clip it in to the center there, and it worked really well. So very minor modifications to get this thing to fit. I also, on the aftermarket fan, I think I pulled off both of these motor cover plates because I needed the space. I needed everything I could get. So there were some modifications there. And in regard to efficiency, let's talk about how these fans flowing at 12 miles per hour can pull enough air to keep the 427 cool. Now, my 427 in the Mustang, I have to drive about 35 miles per hour so that it doesn't just purely overheat.
and 45 miles per hour before the thermostat might be able to actually do something instead of just being wide open. The fans seem to be about 4 times as efficient. So 10 miles per hour through the fan equals 40 miles per hour through the radiator if I'm driving. It has to do with, again, that low pressure that it creates in front of it. So as the fans are running, there's a low pressure, almost like a vacuum, in front of the fans. And that forces air through the radiator at a really efficient rate. Just driving down the road, the radiator is actually an obstruction, like the condenser, the radiator, and the air wants to bounce off and around, flow around over the hood, under the grill, all of that kind of stuff. So it's not as efficient just driving down the road. And that brings up one more thing, again, about that aftermarket fan I was talking about that was rated at 4,600 cubic feet per minute at 28 amps. We saw these fans, or the aftermarket fan, at 28 amps, it was pulling about 3,600 cubic feet per minute with absolutely no load on it. That's not how these fans actually operate. They always have a radiator in front of them. They probably going to have a condenser in front of them. So what happens when you put an obstruction in there is the efficiency drops and the fans have to work harder. The way you get that higher efficiency rating with no load is to use a really lightweight, weak motor that's highly efficient. It's not a heavy duty motor. And that's a real problem when you start putting obstructions in front of those types of fans. They might not flow very well at all. The efficiency can drop way off because those electrical motors are just not strong enough to keep flowing air when there's any kind of obstruction in front of them. So do keep that in mind. I hope this addresses your questions, and I hope this video was helpful. Thanks a lot. See you later.